How does this stuff you're talking about, and Management 2.0, play against leadership? Have we had too much emphasis on leadership and not enough on management? Or do we need a different style of leadership to transform management? How do the two things work with each other?
I think, in a way, yeah, I think we've put too much focus, in a way, on leadership. And let me kind of try to explain why very briefly. If you were to pile up all the different business books by subject area, you'd find the books on leadership, that's a bigger stack than, strategy or change, anything else. And you read those books, and it's really, and you look inside companies, we spend a lot of time trying to produce leaders that have a certain set of capabilities. People who are, bold yet prudent, who are kind of strong and yet empathetic, who are visionary yet practical. And the fact of the matter is, there are very few of those people out there. There are just very few leaders that have, the vision of Steve Jobs, that have the kind of political skills of Lee Kuan Yew or the moral authority of Desmond Tutu. I mean, I don't know many people like that. I'm certainly not that way. And so I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves today is the problem finding or growing these extraordinary leaders, or building organizations that can thrive even when they have kind of fairly mediocre leadership? And I think it's much more the latter. If you look at any measure, democracies have outperformed totalitarian systems over the last 100 years by any possible measure that you can use. And so when you kind of look at that data, the thing that strikes you is, democracies are resilient and adaptable because change can compound from the bottom. And in a democracy, power flows up and accountability flows down. In companies, it tends to be exactly the opposite. So it's not that we shouldn't strive to improve our leadership skills and capabilities. It's just at the end of the day, the notion that we're going to invest a lot of authority for strategy and direction in a small group of people at the top who are somehow superhuman, I think that is entirely a bankrupt notion. I mean, one of the things we know about any social system is that the more highly you concentrate power in it, the less adaptable it is. And so you look at, this long list of companies, we don't need to name names, but this long list of companies right now that are kind of struggling to regain their mojo, where, the problem isn't the recession, the problem is, a fundamental shift in the business environment. They have a business model that's out of date. And you kind of dig through, why did that happen? 9 times out of 10, it happened because the people at the top were unwilling to write off their depreciating intellectual capital. The world was changing around them. They hung on to out-of-date beliefs about the customer, the technology, business model, whatever. They still had the power and authority. And so, the organization its capacity to change was held hostage to their personal willingness to adapt and change. So I think we need a lot less attention on leadership and a lot more on how do you day by day exploit the collective intelligence and energy of the whole organization. How do you aggregate that together in a way that reveals, where we should go next, the new opportunities. But the idea that, 1 or 2 people at the top are going to be the primary decision makers and visionaries, I think that's just unsustainable in a world that is as complex and as changing as fast as the one we have right now. I've often found it kind of interesting that while a lot of CEOs will talk about the need for change and how it's so important, I know of virtually no company that has trained every employee to be an internal activist. In fact, we're almost afraid of that kind of idea. Not an anarchist, but, an activist. And yet in democracy, we don't expect change at least we shouldn't expect change is going to start in Brussels, London, Washington, wherever. Change starts from, ordinary people who form a new political party or, start a campaign to save the environment or whatever. And yet inside our organizations, we really haven't harnessed that ability of frontline people to build a coalition, advance a point of view, start to shape policy. They're sitting there kind of helpless. They've been taught that strategy starts at the top. That turns out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you don't take any responsibility for it, you have to wait till the next kind of leader comes in. These things I think we have to change, or our organizations simply are going to go through, continuous kind of cycles of convulsive change after they've missed critical things that are changing in the environment.
One of the ideas that you're very associated with is this notion of core competencies, which really set the strategy agenda for a good decade for most CEOs. What are Gary Hamel's core competencies?
That's a great question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that, and it's probably a judgment people should make from the outside. But I'll take a crack at it. I think one of my, if I've had any impact in management, that's for others to judge. I think it might be for following set of reasons. number one, I'm very interested in the world of practice. Theory is fine, but only if it helps us do something practical in a new and better way. And so I think that kind of love for making a real difference, for trying things out, for kind of mucking in, so maybe that's a little bit of it. I would say number two, none of these problems for me are intellectual problems. This is not, in fact, I would argue they're not even really about how to make organizations more effective. I'm motivated by human problems. The challenge today, I think, is that, as I said, our organizations need to become more adaptable, more innovative, more engaging. Interestingly enough, human beings are already all of these things. I know many people who've changed careers midlife, which is, takes a huge amount of personal resilience, or they've dealt with some family tragedy. As we've democratized the tools of innovation, we're learning that every human being has this impulse inside. You look at the millions of photos every week that go up to Flickr, the stuff on YouTube, go to a site like fanfiction.net where you have literally hundreds of thousands of stories that kind of ordinary people have written about their favorite fictional characters. I mean, there's this deep seam of creativity in people, and by the way, we're pretty engaging as well. It's why we watch reality television and so on. So you start to ask yourself, why is it that our organizations are less human than the people who work there? And why is it that we can't bring all of that humanity to work? And so I think for the first time, probably in 100 years and more, the only way you can build an organization that's fit for the future is by building one that's truly fit for human beings. And so I think if people believe that you're coming from a point of true empathy and concern about how you make their lives better and how, that gives you license to do a lot of things and try a lot of things that they're simply not going to give you if they think you merely have an intellectual interest or if you have primarily a selfish interest. And then I think the last kind of piece is you have to be a contrarian. And, it's I don't know where that spirit comes from, but, I think you have to think like an outsider. You have to be constantly challenging the conventional wisdom. You can't take anything for granted today. And, the moment you say to yourself, I figured this out, I know how it works, you're kind of captured. When I talk to CEOs, often, if I'm learning about a new business, a new industry, a CEO often say to me, Gary, let me tell you how our industry works. And I always kind of think, well, like for now, or as far as you know, or until it doesn't. And so I think in the world we live in today, one of the most important personal disciplines for anybody is to regard everything you believe as merely a hypothesis and to be forever uncertain about, those beliefs and forever willing to challenge them. So I think, it's that combination of hopefully being empathetic, being a bit of a contrarian, constantly circling from the world of theory into the world of practice and back. So maybe those are some of the personal things that have helped me, at least in my own career.
Gary Hamel, thank you very much.
Pleasure.